talking on an interesting topic like the politics of choice and hamartia in Hamlet and Macbeth. I welcome the colleagues my college and from other colleges who have participated in it. And I appreciate the reaction of my dear students of Alamin Memorial Minority College as well as those who have joined from other colleges. I hope that with this blissful occasion will enjoy the entire discussion followed by questions. I must especially thank my teachers of English department and me who, by giving me support and assistance, will hopefully make the webinar a success. For last few months, we are passing through which we have faced ever before. We are all confined within the four walls of our houses and our culture. The culture, our identity, our education is art. Therefore, we need a means for contemplation and attainment of education. We will such means in this unnatural situation for broken. Our to this meaner. However, the takeaway is, as I already told you, is the politics of choice and hamartia in Hamlet and Macbeth. So, that Macbeth and Hamlet are two main tragedies of the great English master William Shakespeare. In them, we see the fall of the tragic heroes, Macbeth and Hamlet, their damnation, respectively, led by politics of choice, of over ambition, or which we call vaulting ambition of Macbeth, which is actually in him as a spur to kill the king Duncan, and procrastination or delay in action in the hero Hamlet to kill his uncle Claudius, which arose from their errors of judgment. In other words, from hamartia. In Macbeth, this error of judgment comes from some sort of moral shortcoming of the hero. And in Hamlet, it is from his mental collapse, from an unbearable psychological stress and tension, and excessive contemplation and speculation. Such erroneous actions change their destiny of suffering. Destiny from good to bad, from bad to worse. It is the character of the hero in each case that has made his destiny of suffering and ultimate of death and the audience. So, definitely, we are shortly going to be engrossed into the tragic situations of Hamlet and Macbeth, with special focus to their choice of politics and hamartia to be beautifully presented by our keynote speaker. So I request you all to give due attention during his valuable lecture. I thank you all once again and wish a success of this today's webinar. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much, sir. Now we are going to start the discussion of this topic, and therefore we invite our distinguished speaker,
Dr.
Dr. Shobha Sarkar, to kindly present his speech on this particular topic before us. Sir, please, over to you.
Thank you very much. Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Good morning, everyone. Honorable Principal Sir, Dr. Nurul Haq Sir, Principal Al-Amin Memorial Minority College, Baritpur. Respected Honorable Faculty of the Department of English, Al-Amin Memorial Minority College, respected Professor Martin Ahmed Sir, Shadiar Ahmed Sir, Rajiv Jana, Mr. Mondo, for giving me this proud privilege of addressing the learned scholars of the college. As Dr. Nurul Haq has in his few words with such a clarity presented the topic of my discussion today, I would like to share with you my views on the topic for my discussion, that is politics of choice and Hamartia of Hamlet and Macbeth. As Dr. Nurul Haq Sir, you have rightly pointed out that these fiction characters have been occupying much of the discursive space among the students, teachers and scholars of English literature, and these two characters are more remarkable for their Hamartia, for moving from a state of relative happiness to a state of abject misfortune, for committing an error on the basis of judgment. Hamlet, as you have rightly pointed out, procrastinates, delays, and through his delay, he moves towards his death, unable to accomplish his act of revenge. While Macbeth, as you said, because of his vaulting ambition, led to the final catastrophe, murders King Duncan, and finally goes through a series of reversals. These two Shakespearean characters are really interesting for us, for our study. And let me first clarify the scope of my lecture today. With reference to the keywords used in the title, by the word politics, I mean political philosophy. Philosophy that is concerned with the concepts and arguments involved in political opinion related to practices and institutions that are concerned with the rule of governance. Two characters from Shakespeare's two major tragedies, Hamlet and Macbeth, would be involved to arrive at a theory on how political decisions are arrived at, and of course the consequence of such political acts. Words choice and Hamartia that I have used in my title will thus be integrated in the whole political process of decision making, of usurpation, revenge, attainment of political power, or even non-attainment, entitlement, and things. The word Hamartia, as Saha has rightly pointed out, is taken from Aristotle's use of the word in the Poetics, simply meaning error, mistake, or miscalculation. Therefore, this study shall be empirical and descriptive, confined to the reading of the text and the political context. Attempts would also be made to relate the characters, their choice, and their mistakes to the most vital aspect of their lives. That is, their political action towards the realization of their monarchical aspirations. Some set standards of ethics, morality, and judgment are interrelated, and these are to be brought in the course of the discussion. And these will be defining their progressive action that will guide them towards public authority, power, and kingship rights. In both cases, the dominant political system is feudal. Yeah, in these two places, the dominant political system is feudal, monarchical, and based on entitlement to the throne through a system of primogeniture or the right of succession belonging to the eldest son by feudal and patriarchal rules. While Macbeth attains power, Hamlet keeps on procrastinating or delaying till the end, only to receive a fatal fatal wound before reclaiming his rightful monarchical authority. In both cases, we find that the dominant political feudal system and the monarchical system work.
হয়েছে
Macbeth gains power
কাজের চ্যানেল এটা দেখা যাচ্ছে
because he does not belong to the hierarchy,
গিয়ে
while
লাস্ট
Hamlet is a legitimate heir to the throne of Denmark. And interestingly, while Macbeth becomes the king, Hamlet perpetually remains the prince of Denmark, it is said. The purpose of this lecture is to go beyond the study of history and sources and trace the logic of the political act of choice and hamartia within the overall thematic design of Shakespeare's masterpiece, Hamlet and Macbeth. In these plays, the politics of choice and hamartia remain intertwined, interrelated. For Hamlet, it is related to the reclamation of the throne usurped by his uncle and the new king, King Claudius. For Macbeth, it is the politics of ascendancy to the throne by the valor of a violent criminal act. Hamlet's preoccupation with profound theological and philosophical debates as a scholar of Wittenberg on the one hand, and Macbeth's incurable obsession with evil, the idea of bloodshed, crime, and Machiavellism, all these have led me to explore the contradictions inherent in politics of choice and, of course, hamartia of these two popular Shakespearean characters. Their psychological processes and the psychic patterns are revealed through the soliloquies and insert commentaries on them made by other characters of the play.
আমি তো জানি না
Hamlet, as we all know, is a product of Elizabethans. 1601, the play was produced. So, with Hamlet, Shakespeare is stepping into
আমি জানি না
the world that is Jacobean. So, Hamlet is a product of Elizabethan.
হ্যাঁ ইউটিউবে তো
While
মাঝখানে
Macbeth,
আমারটা হচ্ছে
composed in the reign of King James I,
তারপরে হচ্ছে
is a product
আপনার
of
জিমেলের পেজ
Jacobean ethical contradictions.
এটা আমি ঠিক করলাম
In both the plays, Shakespeare takes recourse to the Bible and other contemporary theological debates,
No.
along with the works of the Renaissance scholars, like Pico della Mirandola, especially his oration on the dignity of man, and Niccolò Machiavelli's The Prince. Shakespeare's overt use of Christian symbology, epiphanies, and especially the use of the chalice metaphor, vis-a-vis the spirit of Mirandola and Machiavelli, make this play interesting, loaded in subtle contradictions. For this comparative study in politics and theatrical action, I must therefore revert to Aristotle's concept of plot and character. As you all know, that Aristotle stated that plot is the soul of any tragedy. Arche kai suche. The plot is the soul of tragedy. Is the primary thing, and character the secondary. The plot is the skeleton to hold the story together. It is the action of the character that provides the material for the plot. By the word character, Aristotle meant both what the person or the character is and what the character does. The plot is defined by the action of the character. While defining complex plot, Aristotle safely said that the character should pass through different stages. First, he will be placed in a state of ignorance, in a happy state. This person will be committing hamartia or error, and then this will lead to a reversal of fortune. Finally, there will be an abnormality, and through this realization, the character will move towards ultimate downfall. From a state of cosmos to a state of chaos, from a state of
Hello.
hello, to a state of relative happiness to a state of misery, from a state of ignorance to a state of knowledge. So what the character is relatively less important than what the character does. In poetics, Aristotle says that tragedy is an imitation of an action that is serious, representing such action with agents who are necessarily either good men or bad. Any serious political act having importance or being of import, having weight, falls under this category and is fit for imitation in tragedy. Both Hamlet and Macbeth are actors or agents undertake serious political tasks. Hamlet wants to regain his kingdom, and Macbeth wants to establish a new kingdom. In chapter 6 of the Poetics, the word serious implies good, or rather ethical. Tragedy, then, we can say is an imitation of not merely a good agent, but also their good action, serious action that is good. In Hamlet, both the agent and the act fall under this category of good and serious. But in case of Macbeth, the case is different. The four cardinal points in the conception of character, according to Aristotle, are: first and foremost, we must remember that they shall be good, and that they should be appropriate. This is the second quality. First, they should be, and foremost, that they should be good, and then they should be appropriate, that they should be like reality, and finally, they should be consistent. While both Hamlet and Macbeth are appropriate in their content, and the conception has verisimilitude, like the reality, Macbeth is consistent throughout the play. But Hamlet, on the other hand, as F.L. Lucas has rightly pointed out, is consistently inconsistent. Goodness of character is essential to Aristotle's whole theory because it is the foundation for the arousal of sympathy in the mind of an audience. And sympathy is the very basis of tragic pleasure. Hamlet has lost his father. His mother is married to his uncle. He is the prince for whom the kingdom is not assured. Macbeth has won a battle for the king. He has been promoted to new thainship. The king has conferred his new titles, and lavished praises after praises upon him. They both appear to fit Aristotle's definition of good personages. Both are then engaged in action that is serious. For Hamlet, the task is to regain his lost kingdom, avenge the death of his father, and restore himself to safe maternal custody. For Macbeth, to remain satisfied with his new title, serve the king as a good host, and prepare himself for similar acts of valor, like a Bellona's bridegroom in the battlefield. So they must remain good with their essential goodness. The most tragic situations arise between friends or between blood relations. In both cases, the central characters, Hamlet and Macbeth, are pitted against those who are close and dear. In chapter 15, Aristotle refers to the badness of character, say the badness of Menelaus in the Orestes, as being not required. And in chapter 25, as Humphrey House has rightly pointed out, Aristotle accepts no possible apology for the depravity of character. But here we have two types of characters, Hamlet and Macbeth. Macbeth has some depravity, while Hamlet has none. The problem related to the political compulsion of taking a possible course of action surfaces in both cases. Badness may be necessary in certain tragedies, but such acts should not make the characters base, depraved, wicked, or imperfect in order to retain the basic goodness of the play as a whole. However, Aristotle's goody-goody man is not good unless he is desiring specific, positive, good ends and working towards their attainment. Like Oedipus, you remember, trying to save the Thebans from the devastating plague and epidemic. While Hamlet may safely step into the good shoes of Oedipus, for Macbeth, the shoes appear to be larger than him. So, as the Prince of Cumberland, Malcolm is announced that Malcolm shall be the king hereafter, as per King Duncan's proclamation. So for Macbeth, this is a step on which Macbeth must fall down to remain ethically good. Hamlet, again, is positive with a similar choice of good act, and good act deferred sine die. What is the good act that Hamlet is asked to do? The father ghost comes, asks Hamlet to revenge his death. So Hamlet too is posited with a similar choice of good act and good act deferred sine die, culminating in disobedience and death. Hamlet's father appears to Hamlet as a ghost, directing him to the task of revenge. Hamlet as a tragic hero appears preeminently virtuous and just, trying to purchase more time to accomplish the act of revenge by converting this secretly told story into a public conviction to commit the act of revenge. This is his main cause for delay. So he wants to convert an act of murder that is privately told to him by the father's ghost into a public act of murder so that the people can justify his act of revenge. So he is an entirely good man. Hamlet is an entirely good man. But this entirely good man, passing from happiness to misery, according to Aristotle, will not arouse pity or fear. It will simply be odious. So the rise and fall of Hamlet will simply be odious. Similarly, if Macbeth takes up arms and quite consciously kills the king like a villain, rules like a tyrant, and killed at the end, the action will simply satisfy our sense of justice. Thus, here the politics of choice that befits an ideal tragic hero is related to hamartia or error. The entire plot allows a person to move from a state of happiness to a state of misery, from ignorance to knowledge, and thus through a reversal of fortune or peripeteia and discovery or anagnosis, attain the stature of a tragic hero in a complex plot. Both Hamlet and Macbeth are of mixed personage, neither too good nor entirely bad. Their desires are not so trained or controlled. Their intellect is not so habituated to the right calculation of means, and they are not adept at making the right practical inferences all the time. They both stand in the axiomatic point of the Cartesian axis. The vertical axis and the horizontal axis is crossing at that Cartesian point of 0, 0. They are standing on the crossroads of their life, posited with a challenge to choose the right path, to choose which road to take, say, which road to avoid. So two roads are there before them, road to be taken and road not to be taken. There is always a gap between the desired end and their achievable end. Their right to act is turned into a compulsion to act. This compulsion to act is to select one. So they cannot just sit idle without choosing a right path or a road. So there is a compulsion to select because of the public responsibility, the political position they hold. So they have the compulsion to select. Their action becomes more and more immediate and spontaneous. To act good is also to act safe. Safe in a right political sense. Moral issues are involved in such matters of the possible course of action. Both are required to kill their adversaries. An evil person has already a bent or habit of evil. The past stories of both Hamlet and Macbeth tell the contrary. Their contingent action depends on policy, or rather politics of choice. They are both learned, they are both poetic, philosophical, calculating, Mirandelian or Machiavellian type respectively. Hamlet is a hero, deemed to be an avenger. Macbeth too is a hero, but deemed to be a villain. Both are of course appropriate, and there is nothing at variance with that of the feudal class to which they belong. For Professor F.L. Lucas, such characters are true to type, or rather absolutely typical. They are typical characters drawn from typical life and placed in a typical situation. These characters are dynamic rather than static, and they must act in order to justify why they are there in the play. Whatever they do has to be political, as they are both public figures and contenders to the throne. Hamlet and Macbeth are also drawn from the history books, and whatever story is woven about them has to be historically appropriate too. Even the Elizabethan and Jacobean audience knew what they are going to do. There is no scope for any speculation regarding their action, even in such fictional plays where they exist in through different space and time. The word appropriateness may correspond to the political environment, the legal and social apparatuses they naturally inhabit, or the mode of production that appropriate their being and action. For Macbeth, the act of overleaping with his vaulting ambition and commit the deed might seem appropriate, if at all the attainment of principality with the sheer power of sword is legal. Similarly, for Hamlet, the execution of revenge through a direct assault and murder might suffice if he has the political acumen and power to take up arms against the sea of trouble and by opposing end them. But there are limitations set on both of them, and they have to act politically to succeed, preserve themselves, and then perpetuate their rule. The third aspect of tragic hero, according to Aristotle, is likeness of character. In case of a play based on historical sources, both Hamlet and Macbeth are based on historical sources. Such likeness depends on historical authenticity. They are the personages drawn from history or legend, depriving Shakespeare the scope of creative freedom. F.H. Boucher regards this as an aspect of verisimilitude, that is, being true to life. Being a poet of nature, as Dr. Johnson found in Shakespeare, the poet naturalizes both the characters and makes them soliloquizing heroes. Through tragedy, characters can be turned into personages better than average by exposing their inner mind caught in a perpetual conflict. For Shakespeare, it served two purposes. First, to highlight their moral and ethical goodness. Second, to critique their action from a personal point of view. What is done by them may be wrong, but the audience has a glimpse of what they had otherwise intended to do. The action of a tragedy is more than a mere slice of real life or a slice of history. This depends on the process of material of naturalization of their choice, or rather, the politicization of their action. Being placed on the top of feudal hierarchy, being competent contenders to their respective thrones, both Macbeth and Hamlet, they are both public figures. King Claudius in Hamlet aptly remarks at the end of Act 3, Scene 1, Agnes in great ones must not unwashed go. Every action of great ones has to be political one, based on their choice and likeness to reality. Both Hamlet and Macbeth are entailed to act accordingly. Such action has to be consistent with the character and the conduct. Consistency is the fourth essential requirement for character. Seen as a whole, the development of the tragic hero must take place according to intelligible principles that are probable and necessary. For Hamlet, the act of revenge through regicide is both probable and necessary, and even consistent to the power and privileges of his royal upbringing. For Macbeth, early victory in the battlefield and mass slaughter of enemies have gradually made him proud of his power and glory. His consistent pursuit for bettering himself might culminate in his conclusive words. He says in Act 1, Scene 7 of the play, just before the murder of King Duncan, this blow, the murder of King Duncan, might be the be-all and end-all here. Hamlet, on the other hand, must remain alert to the pricks of his conscience throughout, being obsessed with humanistic principles. That his university education at Wittenberg has imparted him. Hamlet remains consistently inconsistent, oscillating with his conflicting passions, soliloquizing throughout the text, to be or not to be. Finally, we come to the question of hamartia. In Aristotelian sense, a tragic hero cannot be perfect because his misfortunes could be odious and offend our sense of justice. Neither can the tragic protagonist can be imperfect, as his misfortune will satisfy our sense of justice. Being of a mixed personage, both Hamlet and Macbeth are less than perfect and better than imperfect. That is, they have maintained in the characters some scope of doing some action at all. Even the word drama is derived from the Greek word dryan, that means to act. And as Bernard Shaw has said, action gives rise to conflict, and if there is no conflict, there can be no drama. The moral imperfections make the heroes intermediate kind of personages, not preeminently virtuous or just, neither entirely bad, and thus capable of doing some act of serious implications. According to Humphrey House, this brings us to the famous and vexed questions of hamartia, an English transliteration of the Greek word error. The Greek word means error. So according to Humphrey House, the first thing to grasp about this famous word is that it is not a general inclusive descriptive phrase for those moral shortcomings in which the hero, as already described, is said to fall short of being so preeminently virtuous or just. It should be quite plain from the two uses of the word. In chapter 13, Aristotle is quite clearly and deliberately distinguishing the word hamartia from these general moral feelings. What are these? Number one, number A, misfortune that is brought upon him not by vice or depravity, but by some error of judgment or hamartia. So Aristotle refers to this not as misfortune that is brought upon him by vice or depravity, but by some error of judgment. This is Ingram Bywater's translation, error of judgment, while Butcher prefers to keep the word error as a translation of the word hamartia. Number B, the cause of it, the cause of hamartia must not lie in any depravity, but in some great error. So the cause of the final downfall of the tragic hero should not lie in any kind of depravity, disability, but rather in some great error or hamartia. So this is again Ingram Bywater's translation, great error or hamartia on his part. The man himself either brings such as we have described, or better or worse than that. Say Hamlet is definitely partly above the average, partly better than the intermediate kind of personage, and the probability or necessity of committing hamartia is perhaps lesser than that of Macbeth. But still, he also commits hamartia, an error. Macbeth, on the other hand, appears to be more adventurous, more confident regarding the execution of action, and is even ready to face the consequence of such action than Hamlet. Hamartia, however, is not concerned with the general moral characters. Both the better man or the worse man than the average is capable of committing hamartia. According to F.H. Butcher, quantitative great or big is not a natural adjective to apply to a mental quality or a flaw in conduct. The word hamartia then is not concerned with the moral shortcomings.
বললাম ওরা যাচ্ছে না
This word is different than hubrai, H-U-B-R-I-S, hubrai, or hubris, or the moral qualities of a human being with normal quota of pride and self-esteem. Hamartia is not a moral state, but a specific error which a character makes or commits. Even the phrase tragic flaw should not be treated as an equivalent word to hamartia. And this word, tragic flaw, this phrase tragic flaw, should be treated with suspicion, as it is not an Aristotelian phrase. Though we can use the word as a literal translation of hamartia in the strict and properly limited sense. A characteristic moral failing in an otherwise predominantly good man like Hamlet or Macbeth seem probable. Even other Shakespearean characters have this. You remember King Lear is very rash in judgment. So in the opening court scene, he asks the daughters, which one, let's say, love us most? The first one, Goneril comes and says a lot. Regan repeats that I am made up of the self-same metal as my sister is. And finally it is Cordelia, who cannot heave her heart into his mouth and says nothing.
যত পাঠাচ্ছে আস্তে আস্তে
The King Lear is enraged and throws out Cordelia from this entitlement right. So in Shakespeare's characters, we have this moral failing, tragic flaws, like King Lear is rash in judgment, Othello is jealous and suspicious, Macbeth on the other hand is over ambitious, and Hamlet is conscientious. In classical tragedies too, tragic flaws can be seen. Agamemnon, the first part of Oresteia. Agamemnon, the character, is proud and selfish. Oedipus is hasty in temper. Medea is very confident, very possessive, and has a criminal bent of mind. Such tragic flaws provide the basis of their hamartia, but are different than hamartia, according to Bywater and Rustavny. Hamartia means an error, which is derived from ignorance of some material fact or circumstance. Aristotle in his Nicomachean Ethics, Book 5, Chapter 8, as well as in Book 3, Chapter 1, refers to the word hamartia and includes different kinds of injury in transaction between human beings. He further classifies hamartia into different types. In Chapter 5, Section 8, he states that those done in ignorance are mistakes when the person acted on the act, the instrument, or the end that will be attained is other than the agent subject. So Hamlet wanted to avenge the death of his father. At the end, he becomes the object of revenge. Revenge by Laertes, whose father Polonius has been unwittingly killed by Hamlet. You remember in that famous process scene, Polonius is hiding behind the arras, and Hamlet stabs Polonius. A rat. So we have Hamlet committing a crime against an innocent Polonius, and therefore Polonius' son Laertes must avenge the death of his father. So Hamlet was trying to avenge the death of his own father, and now becomes the object of revenge of Laertes, whose father is killed by Hamlet. Macbeth, on the other hand, wanted to be the king, and he thinks that this blow, the end all, be all, will be the last blow, and will end all murders and crimes. But what happens to Macbeth? He finds himself deep in acts of murder and crimes, even after killing King Duncan. Even when Macbeth becomes a king thereafter, Macbeth has to safeguard his kingdom by killing people. So we have this series of killing in both the cases of Hamlet and Macbeth. In Hamlet's case, most of the killings are not designed by him. In case of Macbeth, these killings are all planned, designed, and executed by him. They both have committed a voluntary act, but had done the act by reason of ignorance of fact. While Hamlet's procrastination and political choice of waiting in the wings, waiting for an opportunity to execute the act of revenge, leads him to the fatal doom, Macbeth simply executes the deed and faces the music. Hamlet's hamartia is a special class, lying between acts which are voluntary and those which are involuntary. While Macbeth's act is totally voluntary, although he too is not aware of the consequence of his act. Macbeth's deliberation and Hamlet's procrastination both result from what they had rather
অন্যজন
expected.
প্রেজেন্টেশন করছে, আমি যেই প্রেজেন্ট করছি
According to
দেখে
Hegel, Hegel was trying to apply dialectics in the understanding of the question of choice and hamartia. Hegel says that there is a subtle dialectics in this choice. The good chosen by the hero is just a relative good, although the hero or the heroine thinks that act is an absolute good. It is not a political choice between good and evil, right or wrong, but rather between good and absolute good. And the person has definite righteousness in doing that, in selecting that, in choosing that. In the stage of reversal of fortune, acts are regretted by the doer, and with this discovery, they become the objects of our pity and power. So it is very important for us to realize that the ignorance involved
আমার এখানে
is not
কিছু হাত আছে,
ignorance of
যদি এটা
the
আমার
or a
আমার এতে
mistake.
থাকতো তাহলে আমি ব্যাপারটা
It's
দেখতাম।
the kind of the end to be aimed
আমি
at.
সকালে রাজীব স্যারকে
But
বললাম,
that
রাজীব
means a
স্যার বললো
voluntary
আমি
action
আছি তো,
and a
কম্পিউটার
bad
নিয়ে
man.
বসে আছি, তো বলে ঠিক আছে।
It is also to be noted that Aristotle does not assert or deny anything about the connection of hamartia with moral failings in the hero. Of course, moral failings are related to the act, but the act is all. Hamartia is the act, and the representation of the serious act, the serious consequence, constitute the core of the plot of a tragedy, constitutes the soul of a tragedy. So what is character? Character is not what the character is, personality-wise, but what the character does in the course of the play. If the character has done something in the past, and that moral purpose remain in the mind of the
লিঙ্কটা আমি
character,
চালিয়ে দিতে পারবো।
that character has moral feelings, but that moral feeling should be related to the actual act done in the play.
ইমরান
That
গেমিং
constitutes
তোমার
the
কেউ
hamartia.
শোনা শোনা
In some of the plays,
ওই প্রেজেন্ট
especially
করছে,
of
রাজীব
Shakespeare,
স্যারকে বের করে
we
দিয়ে
even can
বারবার
find
দেখছে ঢুকে।
multiple errors committed in a series by the actors. So where is hamartia
আমাকে
in
আগে
case of
জয়েন করলে
Macbeth?
প্রেজেন্ট
Macbeth's
স্ক্রিনটা খুলে
hamartia is at the spur of the moment when the new garments are given to him, the new garments of the Thane of Cawdor, by none other than King Duncan. But this was complemented by another garment that is given to Malcolm. Malcolm is announced as the Prince of Cumberland. Macbeth simply states that this is a step on which I must fall down, or else overleap. Macbeth meets the witches, and the witches greet him. Hail to thee, Macbeth! Thou shalt be the king hereafter. So Macbeth, even before executing the heinous crime of usurpation and murder, has already been promised the throne. So for Macbeth, there are good moral foundations and preparations, strategic preparation for his hamartia. But in this dagger scene, the famous dagger scene of Macbeth, we find that Macbeth's preparation to commit hamartia is ill-conceived and has to be supported by the iron will and determination of Lady Macbeth. Therefore, it is important to realize that the ignorance involved is not ignorance of the end or a mistake in the kind of the end to be aimed at. What that means a voluntary action and a bad one.
এখন করতে পারবো তো।
It is also very important to realize that Aristotle does not deny this connection between moral failing of the hero, the shortcomings. Macbeth has shortcomings, definite shortcomings. As Lady Macbeth says that thou art too full of milk of human kindness. Thou shalt take the shortcut way, but should find some kind of escape route in order to escape. So here we have in play the theory of error. So Macbeth and Hamlet both assume a course that has a point where the hamartia has to be committed, and this hamartia is to be accompanied by some kind of disputations, and these disputations are more or less confined to the self. So there is no consultation, no scope for consultation. Interestingly, Hamlet is the most soliloquizing of Shakespearean heroes. And definitely Macbeth comes second to Hamlet in his soliloquies. Both are poetic. Both have the propensity to turn their mind into metaphors, thought process, intellect into metaphysical conceits. And in order to judge what they are going to do, they reveal a lot about themselves. So when we take that theory of hamartia that involves error of the tragic hero and fits in the schema of plays like Hamlet and Macbeth, we find that the whole train of action and the discovery, the murder of King Hamlet, and the act of liberation of Denmark from the rule of a murderer, usurper, and tyrant, all these are interwoven. But we must remember that Hamlet as a character is also ignorant of the strategies adopted by King Claudius to safeguard himself from Prince Hamlet. So Hamlet is not aware fully what are the strategies adopted by King Claudius to safeguard himself from Prince Hamlet. What are these strategies? So King Claudius appoints Rosencrantz and Guildenstern to spy upon the activities of their friend Hamlet, their childhood friend Hamlet, and to report to the king and to Polonius what he thinks, what he does, what are his plans, how is he planning to execute the act of revenge. So this implantation of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern is unknown to Hamlet. Hamlet knows this, of course, and he knows this and plays with this, but the folly of his own judgment, that he is too good to believe in the infidelity of his friends, the betrayal of his friends, leads him to a kind of folly. Even Ophelia is planted by Polonius to know about his mind. King Claudius, you remember, says that madness in great ones must not unwatched go. And this Hamlet becomes the object of scrutiny throughout. Hamlet does not know this. Hamlet as an avenger, a secret avenger, who wants to usurp or reassert his power, has to be therefore more careful and to take up arms in order to execute what he wants to. But on the other hand, we find that Hamlet on the stage, it is famous soliloquy. Let us read the soliloquy in order to understand the actual politics of choice and hamartia in Hamlet. The famous soliloquy, one of the most famous soliloquies ever written by Shakespeare, one of the few most quoted soliloquies of the world theatre. To be or not to be? That is the question. Whether it is nobler in mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take up arms against a sea of troubles, and by opposing them, to die, to sleep, no. And by a sleep to say we end. Heart aches by the thousand natural shocks, that flesh is tired to. The consummation, devoutly to be wished. To sleep, what chance to dream? Hey, there is a rub. What is that sleep of death? What dreams may come when we have shuffled off this mortal coil, must give us pause. There's the respect that makes calamity of so long life. Who would bear the whips and scorns of time, the upraise of wrong, the proud man's contumely, the bands of despised love, the loss, delay, the insolence of office, and the spawns that patient merit of the unworthy takes, when he himself might his poetess make to be a bodkin, who would this models bear to grunt and sweat under weary life, but at the dread of something after death, undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveler returns, passes away and makes us rather bear those ills we have than fly to others that we know not of. This conscience doth make cowards of us all, and thus the native hue of resolution is sickened over with the pale cast of thought, and enterprises of great pit and moment with disregard the current stunt, airy and loosening of action. This famous soliloquy of Hamlet places Hamlet in a position of no return, catch-22 position where he is oscillating and vacillating, a position where he is caught up in action, caught up in action, in inaction, action that has to be done, but caught between the two extremes of to be or not to be, to take up arms and not to take up arms, to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or just to protest and fight against the sea of trouble. Caught in this perpetual flux, Hamlet has no other choice but to wait. But Hamartia cannot be this.
এই জিনিসটা দেখানো যাবে
Political choice of innate, not a choice based on static economic private act of revenge into public act. So other tells him that yes, King Claudius has killed. But this is a private, personal, secret exchange. Hamlet requires some kind of political statement, public statement of this crime. In order to catch the conscience of the king, what does Hamlet do? Hamlet introduces an insert play, the murder of Gonzago. And in this insert play, he wants to catch the conscience of the king. So in order to catch the conscience of the king, what does he do? Interpolates some 18 lines. Of the players, the tragic players, they enact the scene with such 18 interpolated lines. So they are there, they will perform on the stage, and what will Hamlet do? In this public performance, we'll find some pricks of conscience in King Claudius, Queen Gertrude, and convert his personal, private act of revenge into public statement of confession and execute his crime. Once the play is done, Claudius is disturbed and Hamlet rushes in to execute his crime, because the disturbance of the king has proved that yes, this King Claudius is guilty of the crime, and thus he chases him. But Claudius, praying to the god, atoning for his sin, is not a fit object for Hamlet's revenge. So Hamlet has already committed an error, a blind error, unknowing error, the error of procrastination, leaving this King Claudius. At this moment, because playing with heaven, he wants to punish Claudius and send him to heaven. He fails to realize the cardinal fact. In case of Macbeth, now can we come to Macbeth? Macbeth is no stranger than that of Hamlet. Fifth, when that is properly understood, the discovery of the truth of the matter is the actually everything from that state of ignorance, which is the very essence of hamartia. Hamartia, peripeteia, discovery, they all follow. In a series, they hang together in this ideal schematization of tragic plot. The old common phrase, getting hold of the wrong end of the stick, may help an illustration. So Hamlet, you are given a stick, you do not know which end of the stick is the right one. So this getting hold of the wrong end of the stick may help us is not to know that Hamlet has got hold of the wrong end, or not to know which is the right end of the wrong, or not to know that it is a sort of stick that has a right end and a wrong. That is also possible. So whatever decision you have taken, whatever error or whatever action you have done, whether it is an action at all or not. So whether it is the right end or a wrong end, or whether the stick has a right end or a wrong end, and then what you do with the stick, you hold the stick and you beat yourself very hard, which is the result. Because of the reversal, the stick has been charged against you, directed against you. So you are wielding a stick, planning to hit someone else, but unfortunately, the reversal of fortune, the stick starts hitting you. So naturally, this is followed by peripety, a real reversal, a turning of the stick round the opposite way, brought about the forces of circumstances, or by the action of other characters. In this case, what happens? After unwittingly killing in a wanton act of cruelty, Polonius, Hamlet becomes the object of revenge. The person who has planned to avenge the death of his own father becomes an object of revenge of another son who has lost his father. And naturally, this death of this father, death of Polonius, leads to Ophelia's madness, the alienation of Ophelia, and finally the death of Ophelia. So Hamlet is...
How many people did Hamlet kill?
How many people? So Hamlet also commits a series of crimes. He thinks that killing one man is bad, especially when this man is praying to God. So he must wait. He was waiting because he wanted to convert his private act of revenge into a public act of revenge. So he kept on waiting. So his conscience stops him from executing crime against an innocent man. But see what happens to Hamlet. Hamlet kills one innocent man after another. The death of Polonius, death of Ophelia is followed by the death of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. So Rosencrantz and Guildenstern accompany Hamlet to England. King Claudius has given a letter to King of England. What is written on the letter? Hand over Hamlet to you. Please kill Hamlet. So in order to just settle his score and to remove Hamlet from the possibility of usurpation, revenge, this entire plot is made. So when the ship is attacked by the pirates, Hamlet gets hold of that secret letter, unseals it, opens it, finds what is written here. What does he do? He writes instead, whenever, O King of England, you get the letter, kindly kill those who have handed you the letter. So think of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern in the court of England. When they face the King of England, the King of England might have asked them, who? What do you want? So they must have handed over the letter. And in that letter, the king must have loved that in the letter it is written that whoever hands you the letter, kill them. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, kill them. So the king must have asked, who is Rosencrantz, who is Guildenstern? And Rosencrantz must have said, yes, I am Rosencrantz and I am Guildenstern. What awards do you want? So they must have said that whatever is written in the letter, follow the letter in spirit, and then execute whatever is written in that. So king must have seen that these two persons standing before him are handing over a letter that talks about a suicide. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead. So why are they dead? Tom Stoppard takes up this question. Why are they dead? They are dead, dead, dead. They keep on tossing. And what they find? That they are dead. So here we have Hamlet hanged, stained in blood. Blood of innocent people. Blood of those who have not caused any harm to Hamlet. While the main target, Claudius, who is also killed by Hamlet at the end. And this comes at the moment when Hamlet himself is poisoned. Poisoned by the chalice, the cup, meant for Hamlet. Poisoned by the sword that is poisoned by Claudius. So Claudius kills Hamlet, becomes successful. Hamlet kills Claudius, becomes successful. But the politics of choice, politics of hamartia becomes more prominent because of this reversal of action, reversal of situation, reversal of the consequence, and the final discovery that procrastination of Hamlet is the main cause of his death. A tragic hero therefore becomes a tragic hero because of its hamartia. So here we have this stick that Hamlet held, starts beating him instead, so holding the wrong end of the stick. The discovery at the end of the play is a realization to which really is the right end. And the fact that if you keep on holding the wrong one and start believing that this is the right one, definitely the chain of consequence will go against you, and one day or the other you will be punished because of it. F.A. Lucas in the book Tragedy discusses this question and finds that evil that is manifested is also related to the act of hamartia. Now let us come to the next play, Macbeth. The broth of evils concocted in the cauldron of Macbeth. Cauldron in Macbeth by the inverter of the poison chalice that is invented by Macbeth himself. If we go through the soliloquy delivered by Macbeth in Act 1, Scene 7 of the play, his idea of evil and the poison chalice become apparent. Like the previous soliloquy that we read of Hamlet, of Act 3, Scene 1, this soliloquy that comes in Act 1, Scene 7 has the idea of evil and the idea of poison chalice that becomes apparent. And this soliloquy is delivered again just before the act of hamartia. While the nature of evil in Macbeth is different from that of Hamlet, the transformation of an act of political murder into a legitimate act of usurpation has been placed in both the plays. While Hamlet is a victim of this illegitimate act of usurpation through the assassination of King Hamlet, Macbeth is himself the assassin who has usurped the throne. Soliloquy before the actual act of murder is done, delivered by Macbeth in Act 1, Scene 7, will throw some light not only on Shakespearean sources on the idea of evil, but also on the poison chalice. So the chalice is a cup that contains the nectar. But this chalice is poisoned by Macbeth. So it is a question about choice. So standing again on the crossroads, on the Cartesian axiomatic point of the intersection of the vertical and the horizontal axis, the 0, 0 of Cartesian axiomatic point, Macbeth is also soliloquizing. He says, but in these cases, we still have judgment here, that we but teach bloody instructions, which being taught, return to plague the ignorant. This even-handed justice commends the ingredients of our poison chalice to our own lips. The choice, the question of choice. So he's making judgment. If hamartia is error of judgment, Macbeth is consciously making judgment. Critics say that this is a conscious error, almost like mocktheria, and the conscious devilry in the act of murder also implies a kind of act that is not between good and absolute good, but a choice between the evil and the worst form of evil. So here we have Macbeth making a judgment between relative bad and absolute bad. He says that this is a point of judgment, that if we take up arms, try to execute something, try to poison someone or kill someone, the even-handed justice will one day or the other will return back that same poison chalice to the inverter of that poison. So the act of political murder is already stated as a morally reprehensible act of cruelty against King Duncan. So Macbeth says that I will proceed no further with this act. Lady Macbeth comes in the scene and says, was that hope drunk, the desire drunk, the desire of becoming the king is now drunk by, lost by the fear of death. So she says that I do not wear the same mask. She had even asked Macbeth to look like an innocent flower while remaining a serpent under it. Now she instills courage in Macbeth to execute. So Macbeth must execute. Macbeth has already decided. So many sources that definitely Shakespeare is using is Niccolo Machiavelli. So gifting Shakespeare with the politics of schematized usurpation. Machiavelli himself was reduced to poverty, sought refuge in little property, wrote his famous work Il Principe, or The Prince, in 1513, and is regarded as the inventor of the reason of state. So choice, political choice, based on hamartia or no hamartia. So Machiavelli is trying to teach, and he says that all those who have attained the position of prince by villainy must also be aware of the aftermath of the act of hamartia, act of the error. If the error is conscious, the judgment related to the error should also be integrated with the consequence of the action. And the villain who becomes the king by the valor of his arms, intelligence, strength, treachery, betrayal, must also be aware of the future consequences of his action and must safeguard, protect himself from the possible counter-revolution and usurpation. So William Shakespeare's Macbeth has attained a prominent position as a person, as a prince, new prince, who has attained power by villainy. So Shakespeare must have followed The Prince, Machiavelli's guidebook, The Prince, conduct book for the kings, more closely than in any other play, even any other contemporary playwright of the Elizabethan and Jacobean period, in order to explore the exigencies of political crime. Machiavelli's The Prince, by underlying the ideas and the politics of the state or governance, also talks about how a person should attain the throne by shortcut means. So Macbeth has two means. So he will catch the nearest way. Lady Macbeth tells that always he is prepared, but he's also too full of milk of human kindness and will keep on making judgments. So he has to be pushed into the act of hamartia. Lady Macbeth does so, and she is capable of pushing Hamlet to the act of hamartia. But before that, is this a dagger which I see before me, the handle towards my hand? Come, come, let me clutch thee. He sees the dagger, but he regards his dagger as an instrument of the mind. He even finds the clots of blood in the dagger. Epiphany, manifestation of Christ, the Savior, and finds that this man, the guest, the king, the Lord, in his house must be protected. Instead, what is he doing? he is going to kill this man. So this dagger will lead him to the act of crime. When the bell rings at 12, Macbeth simply says, "Hear it not, Duncan, for it is Nell that summons thee to heaven, not to hell." It's very ironic. Steeped in dramatic irony, his Hammershea is going to be an act where he does not know whether it is heaven or hell that he will be transported to this act. Whether King Claudius will be transported to heaven and hell was thought of by Hamlet. Hamlet does not kill King Claudius because he is praying. And Hamlet thinks that Claudius might go to heaven at this moment of prayer, while he should be punished and damned and doomed to the hell because of his crime. Macbeth is the criminal himself. What is he saying? "Hear it not, Duncan, for it is Nell that summons, that calls thee to heaven or hell." The object of crime itself is seen as a person moving towards heaven or hell. So Hamlet procrastinates, Macbeth does not procrastinate and commits error. Blindfolded, ignorant of the consequence of the crime. He doesn't know. He has been promised that he shall be the king hereafter, and how to execute the crime is known to him. The entire schema of action has been laid by Lady Macbeth. Now he has simply to do the crime, commit the act of crime. And what he does. But what is he thinking about? His act. He is thinking about his act in terms of the person on whom the act of murder is committed. About the afterlife of Duncan, after death, whether he will go to heaven or to hell. So Macbeth does not have any spur of conscience, no kind of pricks of conscience. He simply has action to make. But in the same soliloquy, he also talks about that this blow be all and end all here. So in the battlefield, he has used his arms to kill so many of people. He was King Duncan's favorite, Bellona's bridegroom. And he thinks that this act is like that act of killing the enemy. But killing the king in an act of usurpation is not killing an enemy. So this is a betrayal of trust, a gross betrayal of trust that Macbeth is going to commit. And then, too, he is not deterred by the consequence of his action. He is determined to carry on his action. And this determination of Macbeth to carry on his action is his Hammershea. The determination of Oedipus in Sophocles' play to execute this idea of identifying the criminal and clear the darkness and thus save the Thebans from the plague constitute the Hammershea of Oedipus. In the similar way, what is the Hammershea of Macbeth? Macbeth's Hammershea is his deliberate, voluntary choice, determined to act against the king, to send the king either to heaven or hell. He thinks that after killing the king be sent to heaven or to hell. In both cases, Macbeth will have a good governance, a rule, and this blow, the last blow, will end a series of blows, and Macbeth can live in a world without such murder and bloodshed. The irony of situation, to the series of reversals, we have Macbeth also committing a series of crimes, a series of voluntary acts of murder, bloodshed. He also tells that he is steeped so much deep in blood that returning were as tedious as going over. So he wanted that this be all and end all, this final blow, killing of King Duncan, will end his act of criminality. Does not end there. Rather, it leads on to a series of crime. He is even against the sons, the future kings, because the witches have told Banquo that thou shalt not be the king, but thou shalt be the progenitor, the father of a king. So we have this Macbeth caught in the peculiar situation. So he was also reading, Shakespeare was also reading Collins's Chronicles, on which the play is based, Buchanan's Rerum's Scoticarum Historia, John Leslie's De Origin Moribus et Rebus Gestis Scotum. So from Holinshed's Chronicle, he got the plot, and from the other plays, he got the morality of the play. And set in this Jacobean period, we have these different philosophers contributing a lot to the making of Macbeth's Hamartia. Macbeth's obsession with the idea of bloodshed, crime, Seneca, Machiavellian ideas can be related to the psychology, even to his pure psychosis. And there is, of course, an allegorical pattern that includes a rewriting of popular history, popular myth of Macbeth in theatrical terms. Shakespeare's knowledge of biblical stories and the ensuing theological debates of the Jacobean period. You must remember that during the Jacobean period, the English Bible, King James's Bible, was being composed. So Shakespeare's knowledge of the biblical stories and the ensuing theological debates that were popular during the Jacobean period contributed to the making of Macbeth's Hamartia, especially the concept of the scriptural chalice. In this chalice, in this play, the chalice is the broth of evil, concocted in the cauldron by the inverter of this. In Act 1, Scene 7, I return back to the same scene, just before the committing Hamartia, what Macbeth is saying. He is contemplating the crime and saying that the crime should be executed at the earliest opportunity. Macbeth is seen preparing the net to entangle and fasten up the plot to ensure Duncan's death and achieve success. The speculation regarding the be-all and end-all, I just told. He supposes that this act of doing the finishing stroke of murder was the be-all, and there was to be done. The end-all in this context signifies even the end of the afterlife of the crime. A single murder that might be temporal, might become be-all, perpetual. But Macbeth seems to be worried about the afterlife of this crime. He knows that the be-all does not necessarily mean the end-all. Therefore, he has still time to make judgments. He has a foresight, but ignores this, and undeterred by the consequence, he plans to do, commit regicide, commit the murder of the guest of the house. Lady Macbeth might say that had he not resembled my father, I might have done the deed. But in Macbeth, we know that Macbeth does know that this is the king, this is the guest, the honorable person of the house. Macbeth, in his self-appointed imaginary judge, Macbeth is his own self-appointed imaginary judge, presiding over both the crime and the punishment. The prosecution proclaims that the murder of King Duncan may lead to his own death. Macbeth is supposed to be loyal to Duncan, number one as a relative, cousin, number two as a subject, thane of Cawdor, and furthermore he is the host at the Inverness castle. And Duncan, as we have just seen, is such a nice man, such a nice great leader, that whoever kills him will be damned. Everyone will be sad. There is nothing to make him execute such a wanton deed, except for his vaulting ambition, which is like a spur, but also like a rider who jumps on a horse and falls off the other side. Macbeth doesn't want to kill someone who has been so kind to him. Even Lady Macbeth asks him what has happened to his hope. Lady Macbeth warns Macbeth that she will not love him if he fails to do what he wants to. Macbeth does not prefer to do it. And Lady Macbeth asks what happened since he was so willing to do it before. He says that if she had sworn to, she would kill a baby suckling at her breast. Lady Macbeth says that they won't fail because they will get the king's attendants drunk and make it look like they did it. Macbeth comments on his wife's manly mettle and starts to believe his wife. She says that it will look like the servants did it. So Macbeth simply agrees to do it while hiding what he did from his face. Macbeth has an incredible fascination with evil. But evil, he does cheating. He must commit crime, but he must also find the escape route. This ironically has a popular appeal among the readers across time and place. Various adaptations of the play in various forms have surfaced all over the world. Even during the Elizabethan period, we have adaptations of Macbeth. Say the Ballad of Macduff, 1596, Tragedy of the King of Scots, 67-68, even Malcolm, King of Scots, 1692. So the multiplicity of the possible readings of the play also focuses on this act of hamartia. So unresolved scriptural, theological issues, along with the psychological ones, are interwoven with the act of hamartia. In Machiavelli the Prince, the exigencies of political crime are elaborated. Machiavelli's affections lay with the Republic, and his theories were intended for his betterment. The corruption of the times, the weakness of the state like Italy, and the threat of foreign conquest made him long for that new prince who might give reality to his dream of the redemption of Italy. So we have this Macbeth, also a symbol of hope, a redeemer. So by overthrowing King Duncan, Macbeth also redeems the state of Scotland from the ineffective rule of governance of this man who prefers the feudal hierarchy, who prefers the monarchical passing of the throne to his son rather than giving the meritorious Macbeth his due reward. In chapter 8 of The Prince, Machiavelli writes about the principality obtained by wickedness of villainy. Macbeth's ascendancy to the throne belongs to the same premise. A person may rise from a lower station in two ways, either by some nefarious or villainous means, or when a private citizen person becomes the prince of his country to the favor of his fellow citizen. The first method we find is suitable for Macbeth. He is an usurper. So like Agathocles, the Sicilian mentioned by Machiavelli, Macbeth becomes the king of Scotland. So from the private low position as a Thane of Cawdor, he finally becomes the king of Scotland. So that man who was the king of son of Porter also became the king. Macbeth's villainy or act of usurpation comes closer to another new prince mentioned by Machiavelli, the Olverto da Fermo, who was left as an orphan and gradually attained the kingship. So we have these examples drawn from the parallels illustrated by Machiavelli in The Prince, like Oliveretto da Fermo, Macbeth, who has hosted a solemn banquet in honor of King Duncan. Act 1, Scene 6, as we have just discussed, opens with hot boys, torches. So Macbeth enters, the tables are cleared, ceremonial dinner prepared. So the torch bearers, sievers, servants cross the stage silently from one side to another. Macbeth is offered a secret and private space to deliver the soliloquy after their exit. It is obvious that King Duncan too must have retired to some private space after the supper to sleep. Duncan's surcease is certain, and he has stepped into the bait laid by Lady Macbeth. Lady Macbeth enters and says, Duncan has almost supped. When Duncan is asleep, the unguarded Duncan will be slaughtered by Macbeth. Every plan is set. Macbeth enters the stage with his soliloquy, and after seizing the stage, the usurper, Machiavelli advised, ought to examine closely into all those injuries that he is going to cause, which are necessary for him to inflict. Such injuries to others should be done at once too. Machiavelli gives this advice to the new prince: if you are giving sops, if you are giving benefits, give the benefits in small installments so that the people can remember for a long time. But when you are causing some harm, do that in one stroke, because the violence, the cruelty of the tyrant, of the new ruler, will be remembered by the subject for a long time. Macbeth similarly is advised by Machiavelli and by Lady Macbeth in this play that the injuries that is to be done on Duncan should be done at one stroke. Such crimes should not be repeated daily. Macbeth follows to make this be all and end all. He who does otherwise is always compelled to keep the knife in his hand. So Hamlet, on the other hand, as we have seen, is compelled to keep the knife always in his hand, as seen in his unwitting murder of Polonius. So the knife was always there in his hand. This is knife he had not used to stab King Claudius. With the same knife, he has killed an innocent man, King Polonius. Macbeth on that stroke can rely on his subject, nor can they attach themselves to him. Macbeth thinks that by using this knife, by using this one stroke and making it be all and end all, he won't be asked to use the knife again. So he thinks that he will rule forever. But ironically, after the crime is committed, he looks like an innocent flower and looks at the body of Duncan, his silver skin laced in golden blood, sheds crocodile tears on the body. He is convinced that injuries ought to be done at all, so that being tasted less, they are often less. This is Macbeth's hamartia. Macbeth's hamartia, he finds himself steeped in blood too far and is forced to commit a series of murders to be safely thus. The usurper and the new prince of Scotland, in order to remain safely thus, must commit conscious murders one after another. So he kills Banquo, Fleance, a small child even is not spared. So we have a series of murders executed by Macbeth. In Shakespeare's play set in Scotland of 11th century AD, this Machiavellian principle works. So Shakespeare was perhaps following the plays of by his own form of guilt. But what Macbeth does is to proceed with the action, thinking that this action will determine the consequence of the action, and Cersei's Sacia and all our yesterdays have lighted rekindled. Life is but and a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage, and then is heard no more. It is a tale told by an idiot full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. So his act of hamartia now is revealed in the stage of discovery as an act of walking like the shadow. Shadow? Referred to by Plato. We are all bound in the cave. Source of light is somewhere outside. We simply follow the shadows that fall on the wall of the cave. Got a walking shadow and played. Macbeth realized that he full
Belching out from misjudgment, which we come to know as the tragic flaw of the character in the classical and other tragedies. The hamartia is used both in Septuagint and New Testament. The Greek word and the New Testament is translated in English as sin, which literally highlights on missing the mark, as John states there. Everyone who sins breaks the law. In fact, sin is lawlessness. If we delve our eyes in the Christian theology, you can see that there is a section named hamartiology. Actually, so just a minute. So what is this hamartiology actually? Just a minute, I lose my context here. So you can see there is a section named Hamartiology. Both Hebrew and word shatter and the Greek equivalent means that missing the mark or off the mark. The splitting of the Greek word shows the two sections, hamartia, which means seen or missing the mark. Or second word is logia, which means the discourse or saying. So hamartiology is a systemic Christian theology which studies about sin. We may have a glance in those long past days of Roman era where we can find the original sin is taught by the great men like Paul or Saint Augustine, where it is said that the Adam's descendants are originally sinful without any choice due to their primal guilt of Adam. Another interpretation of Pelagius shows that as the human is entered at tabula rasa, so Adam's fall only comes minimally as a circumstance only. The third thing stands for the intermediate position, which argues that the fall of Adam impacts a born factor of sinning in the human race. However, hamartia guised in a different way in modern era. In 1963, Isabella Hyde in the article The Tragic Flaw, Is It a Tragic Error in the Modern Language Review, argues that it is incorrect to consider hamartia as a tragic flaw. Hyde highlights something of Butcher's interpretation of poetics, where hamartia is considered both error and the defect in character. Hyde also mentions Butcher's footnote, which delivers that it is not a natural expression to describe a flaw in behavior. Another quotation of A.C. Bradley in Shakespearean Tragedy of 1904 is presented by her in this context, which is saying the comparatively innocent hero still shows some marked imperfection or defect, irresolution, precipitancy and pride and predolescence and excessive simplicity, excessive susceptibility to sexual emotion and the like, whose weakness or defect is so intertwined with the everything that is admirable in him. She even judges the hamartia of Hamlet and Oedipus as a misjudgment, as there is an insufficiency to explain their situation. Leo Holden's hamartia, Ethe, and Oedipus shows where to place hamartia's definition along a spectrum of moral, flaw, intellectual, and error. But the best of all this is probably the Van Brum's quotation on Oedipus's hamartia. No specific sin attaching to him as an individual, but the universally human one of blindly following the light of one's own intellect. So it is evident that the hamartia is transformed from the tragic flaw to a characteristical glitch, which serves a gap of flaw into the intellectual traits of human being. The famous psychoanalyst Jacques Lacan terms the activity outside the logical structure of human psyche as Santo, where he actually models James Joyce's engagement of action outside the Borromean frame of real imagery and symbolic order as the special trait of human being. So there is nothing about the criminality. If you unfold the story in the perspective of criminal, certainly we will discover something strange that we cannot measure, and thus it is named as hamartia. The engulfing situation locked us into home, and in every human mind finds some strange ways which is very inexplicable to the social periphery. Thus we can find the Hamlet in every doorstep. And now I would like to go to the next section, the question and answer session. I am going to give simply a couple of minutes to the audiences. Please make your question, while I request to watch a presentation from our college. Please, Martin Ahmed, give your presentation.
Tanmay Babu. Hello.
Hello.
How long will it continue? This session, how long will it continue?
Only couple
I think it should be.
it only takes a couple of minutes, sir.
Oh. Okay.
There must be a technical problem for what we cannot see the presentation. Okay, now we have some questions before us from our department and students. The first question from the fourth semester honors saying that chronologically we see that Hamlet comes first and then Macbeth. My question is that is there any deliberate intention of Shakespeare to show his contrastive attitudes towards Hamlet's Hamartia with Macbeth? Sir, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear.
Yes. Should I repeat the question?
I got the question. I want to know who this person is. Who asked this question?
It's a student from fourth semester actually.
Name of the student. Because the question is very interesting. I want to see the person. And I would like if the person can offer any kind of explanation for this.
He doesn't mention his name here actually. He just mentioned his class and.
So the chronology is very important. Chronology, we must say, we must remember, is very important in the plays of Shakespeare, especially the performance. With Hamlet, Shakespeare is actually stepping into the Jacobean world, a world that has become ripe unto rottenness. The fag end of Queen Elizabeth's world, when this Hamlet was being composed, was the fag end also of the Renaissance period, was the fag end of the Elizabethan period. The Elizabethan period was a nest of sweet singing birds who could rejoice their new Renaissance values. And Hamlet is, of course, a Renaissance man who is decked with, armed with, learned with the values of Pico della Mirandola and the dignity of man. So Hamlet is saying, what a piece of work is man, how noble in reason, how infinite in faculty, the paragon of animals, the beauty, the beings, the beauty of the world. So this Hamlet has that positive values. Therefore, Hamlet procrastinates, delays, keeps on delaying. You cannot kill a man because the man is a human being. And that man who is praying to God, atoning for the sins, is not a man to be killed because that man will go to heaven directly. Hamlet wants to kill the sin rather than the sinner. But when Macbeth enters the stage in the Jacobean world, that is a world ripe unto rottenness, a world of chaos and decadence, Macbeth does not have this prick of conscience. And chronologically, yes, Macbeth will follow Hamlet when that positive values of the Renaissance period is dead and we have reached the high end of Renaissance, and there will be definitely a gradual decadence of the values. Crime and criminality will be manifested in the persons. So Guy Fawkes, that terrorist, did some explosion in order to kill James I. And Macbeth is the new hero who will challenge the authority of the king, and definitely with violent means. And this violence is projected in Macbeth, while the silence is projected in Hamlet, with reference to the act of using the knife. Macbeth is definitely chronologically situated after the failure of Hamlet. Hamlet does not commit what Macbeth does. So in the wings we have the presence of Malcolm. Always remember, Malcolm is Hamlet. Malcolm is Hamlet. Always remember this. If Claudius is Macbeth, Claudius of the play Hamlet is Macbeth, then Malcolm is also waiting in the wings, like Hamlet, to avenge the death of his father, King Duncan. So here the chronology is important. Why not put Macbeth first and then Hamlet? If that had been so, then this world of Jacobean decadence might have produced a different type of play. So I find that this historically, both the plays are located in the times, and Macbeth can be produced only in that particular Jacobean world, a world ripe unto rottenness, decaying, where we have a playwright like Webster seeing the skull beneath the skin. That is what I have to say. Thank you very much for this question. Very interesting question. Very speculative type of question. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your answer. There is a next question. That is from our faculty members named Abdul Matin. Said that whose Hamartia were more destructive for their damnation, Macbeth or Hamlet?
So again, the theory of relativity must be implied here. In order to understand Hamlet's hamartia, are we supposed to take into account Macbeth's hamartia? Because both are hamartia, error. Error done in ignorance, miscalculation, as Lucian Goldman talks about. So done an inappropriate act without understanding the consequences. Political choice of Macbeth, hamartia. Political choice of Macbeth's hamartia is more detrimental to the future of a stable feudal order, monarchical order. While the political choice of Hamlet's hamartia is self-suicidal. That is the basic difference. So the revolutionary keeps on waiting. There the revolutionary does the act of revolution. But that act of revolution is violent. And even after usurping, he has to commit such similar acts of hamartia. He doesn't bring the opponents under his fold. He had a very good ruled for 18 long years in the annals of Scottish history. Even today, Macbeth is appreciated. But in Shakespeare's play, Macbeth is presented as a villain who executes one crime after another. So taking in account Macbeth the play, we must say that Macbeth's hamartia is more destructive to the feudal monarchical order. While Hamlet's hamartia, again with reference to the context of the play, is perhaps less detrimental to the reasoning of the state, of the feudal monarchical order. But both are detrimental because at the end of the play, the state becomes stateless. Now think of the consequence. In the case of Macbeth, we have the re-emergence of the prince to rule the land. In case of Hamlet, there is the absence of the ruler and the foreign invader, Fortinbras, is taking the chance. So with reference to this consequence of hamartia, we must say that Hamlet's hamartia is more dangerous because he does not leave any ruler. Even after suffering, after his own death, there is no ruler to rule. And there is only a weak person, Horatio, who is there just to appreciate Hamlet. No one else is left. The invaders, enemies are waiting outside. They can come at any moment. This is a difficult choice, politically incorrect.
Yeah, it's a nice explanation. I think it must be satisfied to the speaker. Now we have the third question or the final question here from another person named Rajiv Jana. He questioned that is hamartia and tragic flaw in a tragedy the same thing?
So in my discussion, I talked of these being two different things: tragic flaw and hamartia. Although a group of critics say that these are identical, tragic flaw and hamartia are identical. So flaw leading to tragedy is tragic flaw, as we understand. It's different from hubris or hubris, or the pride that the character has. That is a matter of personality makeup. So Aristotle also made it very clear that it is not the person who is more important, but rather it is the act that is more important. So flaw in character may be tragic flaw. Okay, moral. So the character might be arrogant, rash in judgment, ambitious. So that might be the tragic flaw of the character. Had Macbeth not been ambitious, had Hamlet not been philosophical, so might they have not committed what they had done in the play. But that doesn't happen. So they do that crime, they commit the crime, they do that error, not compelled by their moral makeup, but rather by the judgment that they make regarding that particular act. So error is done. It is an act, specific act that is done in ignorance of the consequence. But a judgment is related to that act. And if the moral makeup of the character is conducive to the act, we call that as tragic flaw. We cannot differentiate that tragic flaw from hamartia. But hamartia is an act. So Hamlet by nature is what? consistent or inconsistent? By nature, he is inconsistent. Therefore, delay will be his tactic. Okay, but does Hamlet delay while killing Polonius? When he sees the curtain moving, at the spur of the moment, he kills that man hiding behind the curtain, thinking that an implant is there, spying on his activities. He is rash in judgment also. Hamlet is also rash in judgment. So his philosophical procrastination does not say him killing Polonius. So this is what I say. I think that, it's my personal opinion, hamartia is the act. Even a good man or a bad man can be capable of, and whatever the act that turns out to be a bad act, holding the stick. So holding the stick is an objective, differentiated act that is not related to the moral tragic flaw of the character.
Okay, thank you, sir, for all of your response. And with this,
Can Dr. someone answer? So, Dr. Nurul Haq, sir. Sir, your audience made the seminar. Thank you very much, sir. Your audience, your presence.
You've given an excellent presentation covering all aspects of this topic, and I am very much impressed personally. I like your discussion. You are most welcome also to our college.
Thank you, sir.
I request you to
Yes,
visit
sir,
our college also.
The students are very good, sir.
Okay.
I want some personal interaction with the students. So that will be possible only after the lockdown is over.
Yes, yes.
So I look forward.
That's
for
why
that.
I am to request you for that. And many have participated here, so I have seen about 70 or 75 live. So it's a good occasion today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir, for giving me this opportunity, sir. I am humbled by your praises, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
thank you, everybody.